Hey friends, this Monster Hunter Lore Series video is going to have a bit of a different format. For this episode, we've opened up our own little interdimensional portal and brought in one of the foremost experts on the lore and mythology of The Witcher. Okay, Gov, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about two of the monsters from the world of The Witcher, which have recently made an appearance in our latest DLC. But before we get into that, can you maybe give us just a brief rundown on the world of The Witcher series in general?
Okay, yeah. So to start with, the world, or the Witcherverse, as most people call it, is a very dark and gritty universe, and the whole idea of it is to show that there's a greyness between whether the monsters are the real enemies or whether it's humanity itself. That's kind of like the whole gist of it. It's like a grey area where there's no idea of moral grounds. Mm-hmm. And the world itself, the beginning of it, if you're going way back, when it all first started, it was a world that was inhabited by a few different races. So for instance, there were dwarves and elves, and then at some point in time, there was a cataclysmic event which took place, which basically forced loads of other beings into this world. So monsters, humans, and other creatures only became a part of a single world at some point in time. So essentially, the Witcherverse already has, in its own way, multiple strands of different universes. So it's already got different universes inside of its own lore, which is kind of cool because it means that there could be anything can happen. So even the monster lore crossover is actually pretty legitimate in terms of the lore. So Ciri going to that world with Geralt actually makes a lot of sense, but I can talk about that a bit later on because she actually has something that relates to it. But
that's really cool to hear.
Like that. Yeah, it's nice actually because it's often when there are crossovers, you have this weird disconnect from the world because it doesn't make any sense inside of its own lore.
Yeah, that's what I just kind of assumed, like interdimensional portal, that's just a way to get Geralt and Ciri here and these monsters, and we'll just kind of suspend disbelief and go with it. But that's neat that that's actually part of the lore of the Witcher series. So you call the world of The Witcher the Witcherverse? It doesn't actually, that universe doesn't have its own name?
Well, I don't think the universe on the whole has its own name, and technically the Witcher world is built up of different continents and countries. Mm-hmm. You've got the Northern Kingdoms, you've got some Eastern empires, which you never actually go to see, but you only hear of. And you've got the Skellige Isles, which is essentially Scotland, Ireland, and a whole lot of Celtic places all mixed into one. And the main kingdom where the game takes place, you have inside of that whole land, there's a kingdom called Temeria. There's one, the names are really difficult to keep up with, but essentially inside of it, there's also another country far away, which is called the Nilfgaardian Empire, which is like a whole plethora of different countries being owned by a massive empire, kind of like what the British were like back in the old days, but it's with suits of armor and everything else. But it's a big world.
So Nilfgaardia is the British Empire. When Geralt first comes through the portal into our world, he introduces himself as Geralt of Rivia.
Yeah.
What exactly is Rivia?
Well, Rivia is a place inside of The Witcher, but technically, he got the name because he won a battle, from best of memory, and also when Geralt became a Witcher, witches get to choose their own names to seem more friendly to common people, because witches aren't very well received by a lot of the more kind of not peasants, but the more simple people who are just living their lives. Mostly because they're scared of them, because they don't know who they are. So they adopt names to pretend they come from somewhere. So Geralt has loads of other names. He's also known as the Butcher of Blaviken, and that's because of a massive slaughter that happened in a place called Blaviken.
I remember that from the book.
yeah, that was interesting. And so essentially, he was knighted at a bridge at the battle for the bridge on the Uraga. And the Uraga is a river that goes through the whole of this kingdom. And he was knighted by Queen Maeve of Lyria from Best, if that's how you pronounce it, I think, anyway. And therefore, he's actually a knight, which is very rare for witches to have an official title, because he wanted to be called, I think it was Geralt Roger Eric de Hort Belgard. That was the name he chose when he first was asked. Yeah, exactly. And his teachers were basically telling him, like, no, you can't do that because that's stupid. So that's where we get to with him.
One of the really cool things about the whole Witcher universe to me is all the characters in this universe are so like detailed and so like they all have these really complicated histories and pasts. And if you contrast that to the world of Monster Hunter, which is actually like historically a very like similar world, you know, they have a very similar past and a very similar mythology. But in the world of Monster Hunter, we have these characters who are the complete opposite. A running thing at Monster Hunter is none of the characters have names. Their names are the Handler, the Admiral, or the Knight. And so it kind of lets you build your own world in your head and your own personalities for these characters. And they're all sort of generic stand-ins for certain character classes, rather than being these like distinct individuals like you have in The Witcher. And I think that's one of the things that the Witcher really did right, was just creating this whole like mythos around itself that lets you really get absorbed in the world.
Well, there's a lot of politics involved in The Witcher, and a lot of in-depth. Like you can talk to people who know about this lore back to front, and it's insane the amount that they understand about this world. It's more than we know about our own sometimes, in terms of the actual depth it goes into, and how much how interesting it can be to hear stories from the world, because it's as if it's what makes the world feel really real. Because you feel like things happened and you feel like there was history behind it. But I didn't know that about Monster Hunter World.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it is, there is a lot of lore behind the game, but it kind of makes you dig for that part of it. When you play the game, it's not all just thrown at you. You kind of have to read into the backstory behind the stuff to get that part of it.
But you have to look for the lore. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But moving on, what can you tell us about? So there's two monsters that have appeared in the world of Monster Hunter that came here from the world of The Witcher through this interdimensional portal. There's one minor monster, the Necker, and so I'd like to know a little bit about that little guy. And then we have this one major beast that's been sort of wreaking havoc in the ancient forest that our hunters have had to deal with, and that is the Lesher.
Yeah, he's awesome. Yeah. Okay, so the Necker is basically, first off, every monster has its own kind of basic class, and then inside of that class has a subcategory for what it is. So the Necker is from the class known as Ogroid or Ogoroid, depending on how anyone wants to pronounce it, and they're essentially scavengers. They mostly kind of stay along the roadside and attack caravans and people who can't put up too much of a fight. And there are various types of different Neckers that are more dangerous than others, and they all have their own kind of little ecosystem. And they normally attack in groups and try and surround people and try and stop them from escaping. And their main way of fighting is in numbers. It's the way they can actually, take on anyone, because they're not particularly strong creatures.
No, it seems individually they're not very dangerous, but they like a wolf pack almost.
Yeah, they're like a wolf pack. But the funny thing about these creatures is that there's quite an interesting story behind them, because even though they are technically grunts in the way of them just being these things that are very primally driven, they actually, inside of the game, there's an Easter egg where you can wander down into these caves, and all over these walls are paintings done by the Neckers. And this was really a substantial piece of information in the world, because it displayed that the monsters were in fact evolving inside of the world. They were becoming intelligent. So it was a really cool little piece of lore, because it was showing that even though these things had been mindless and they were normally just these monsters that would jump out at people and try and get whatever they could before running away, they were actually evolving beyond that, and they were starting to paint and use their minds a little bit more. So it was cool, because it means that the world was evolving, and essentially much further down the line it could get to a point where monsters are equal to humans and everyone else, so they would actually be living amongst everyone, which was a really cool idea in general, just because it would change the way everyone looks at the world on the whole.
Oh, but it makes me feel a little bit bad about the hordes of neckers I cut down while playing The Witcher.
Oh no, it's okay, because they were mindless then, but maybe in the future they'll
Right, yeah, those weren't the
right.
evolved ones. I see.
Those aren't the evolved ones. No,
okay,
no,
well, I
at
don't feel
least
quite
that's
as
what we
bad
tell
then.
ourselves. Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Anything to help us sleep at night.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was going to say that. Yeah, but they're not inside of The Witcher. They're mostly more of those kind of creatures that are annoying, that just kind of get in your way. And like I said, there are various types of different neckers that are there, but on the whole, you really only go after them if you're looking for ingredients, or if you're doing a contract for someone who wants to pay you coin to get rid of them, because they live in nests beneath the ground. They normally are found underneath the trees and the roots of them, because it's better for the structure of their nest, because it won't fall apart as easily. And they have little colonies, and they tunnel, and they can even dig underground during combat, from best in memory.
We have a very similar monster in the world of Monster Hunter, which is the Chakalaka, and I think that maybe the it's a great name, isn't it?
It is.
I think they get along. So the neckers that come here won't be lonely. The Chakalakas are very similar. Not quite as not quite as evil looking, but same sort of creature.
Yeah, the necker to me always looked like a cross between Gollum and a grandmother. That was always the kind of like the look they had to me.
Such a creepy design. Those big teeth and then the like flabby chin underneath. It's just
yeah, actually, they're a bit like the Goblin King from The Hobbit and Gollum. That's actually their design. Oh wow, what have we done? We've broken new rules.
All right. So moving on to the Lesher, what can you tell me about this guy?
Okay, the Leshen, or the Lesher, or people call him even Leshy. It's a very interesting monster because they are what you call a relict, and relict classes are the monsters that were there before the big conjunction of the spheres, when all the worlds collided. So any monster that is part of the relic class tends to be very powerful and often very wise or very dangerous. And a Leshen is essentially a forest spirit, and their whole purpose is to guard the natural world from anyone who seeks to harm it, and to keep a natural balance, and that includes killing things to make sure everything's in a balance. If something else dies out of proportion or something, that they make sure everything's okay. The only problem with that is that they're a little bit touchy if you try to get anywhere near the heart of the forest. And by touchy, I mean they'll try and kill you. But
I've noticed that.
Yeah, they can be a little annoyed. But essentially, as humans and elves and everyone else were building their civilizations, and as they were expanding, they started to expand into the forests, and that's when they started to discover the Leshens, and when the Leshens began to fight back, because they're incredibly powerful creatures, because they can use the natural world around them to help take on their enemies. So they can, for instance, call on other animals. They can send roots shooting through the earth and spindling up into the air against you. And it's kind of another cool way to show the difference between what's right and wrong inside of the Witcher world, because essentially all these creatures are doing are trying to guard the natural order of things and the way that things technically should be. But obviously, human beings just want more and more and more, and they're trying to get more land. They're trying to get more resources. They're cutting down trees. They're a bit like Ents from Lord of the Rings, only a lot scarier, and they don't offer you tea or anything else. So
that's interesting that the creature has that sort of backstory, because when I first saw this thing, I thought it just looks like the embodiment of evil, just the whole design of the creature. And but now that I know that it's actually guarding the ancient forest, and probably from us, that makes me kind of think about it differently. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, it is cool, isn't it? It's like this whole it's kind of like the game keeps setting you up for all these things where you think, oh, this is obviously this, but then suddenly it turns it all on its head, and it's like, no, this isn't anything like you thought it was, and you're completely wrong. And now you're gonna have to suffer the consequences for it, and it's a really cool way to show that there isn't really any good or evil. It's not black and white. It's always this massive grey area between the lesser of two evils, basically. And the Leshen is essentially that. They're incredibly powerful, and no one's really sure if they're exactly intelligent, if they're like sentient, because it's almost as if they're a bit like a golem in some ways, that they just stand around guarding, doing a very, doing everything very step by step by step without really any free thinking. So no one really knows if a Leshen is sentient. They basically only attack anyone if they get too close, and if they try to harm anything inside the forest. But like I said, it's like a big grey area as to whether it's wrong or right, because Leshens don't care who they kill, and they don't care if it's a farmer, a child, if it's a monster, or if it's a witcher. They will attack anyone who tries to get anywhere near the heart of their forest, and they become very bitter about humanity.
They almost seem more like a force of nature than a sentient being in some ways.
Yeah, exactly. They're kind of part of something much, much bigger, it seems like.
So, and I've noticed they have this mind control ability. But it seemed, well, sure, in that and I wanted to ask about this. When the Leshen comes to the ancient forest in Monster Hunter, it's able to control these revoltures, which are like crows or vultures, and it's also able to control the lesser jaguars, which are like these little pack animals, lizard dinosaur pack animals. But it seems like the only ability it has to control these creatures is if they're already like sort of pack animals with a pack mentality. Like obviously it can't like reach out and like control another hunter or a witcher or something like that.
Yeah, normally there's something quite similar that a witcher has, which is a sign called Axie. And that Axie, it's almost like a magical spell which can make the weak-minded do what you want them to do. So in terms of the Leshen, I would imagine, because it's not really explained inside of the game, that they can take on, like you said, they can take over control of pack creatures mainly because of their primal instincts, and maybe they can somehow, or maybe they can just get those that are only naturally connected to the world, who are following the same kind of circle of life in that way, only being able to control the ones that are with them on their side, that are a part of nature, in a proper, true way.
Yeah.
So maybe that's why.
Very cool. All right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to come by and sort of share your this wealth of information that you have. This is the game that you are definitely an expert on, and I want to recommend that anyone who wants to learn more about the world of The Witcher stop by your YouTube channel, because you've done videos on just about every monster in that series. So if you're a fan of The Witcher, you should definitely stop by OKGov. And you've covered some other games too, right?
Yeah, I've started covering some other games. I've started covering some Metro Exodus. I've done some Warframe. and some lore and a few other ones here and there. A lot of different reasons, because mainly The Witcher is quite an old game now, so there's you've got to kind of keep up with the times as well.
Sure.
And plus, the lore of different worlds is really interesting to read about, especially when it's something so different like Metro, which is a completely different animal altogether. So
that's like a cool post-apocalyptic Russia. Is that what that one's set in?
Yeah, it is very, very post-apocalyptic.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah,
I'll have to check that out. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on.
Where else can we follow you other than YouTube? Do you have Twitter?
I've got Twitter and the Discord server, which is up and running, which I can send you the link to have it.
We'll have links to both of those in the description. So make sure you follow OKGov and leave him a comment on one of his videos. Tell him thank you for helping us out. All right. Well, I am fighting off the flu and pretty heavily doped up on NyQuil right now. So I'm going to save this recording and go to bed. But thank you so much.
All right. That sounds like a good idea. You get a good night's rest. And no, thank you. It was my pleasure.
Yeah, I really appreciate you staying up.